Hello, everyone. This is Grant Friedman, editor of PSD Tuts, and today I'm with Mark Heaps, professional photographer, Adobe Certified Professional, and designer at Duarte Design. Mark, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Grant? Happy to be here.
Okay, let's go. Let's start with our first question here. Something that you and I talked about before. Something I want to know a little bit more about is Photoshop a dirty word amongst photographers?
It seems to be there's a sort of group of people that have a sort of elitist approach to photography, and I find they're the guys that kind of have also an equal pride about when they shot film, and it was sort of this push and pull transition to get them into digital. But yeah, there seems to be a large group of people that wear it like a badge of honor to say, this shot didn't have any Photoshop done to it at all. And I regularly hear that at conferences and workshops and guys showing their portfolios is they sort of say, well, this is a good shot, but I didn't do any Photoshop either, as if that's supposed to make you think that it's a better shot or a better image, and it's kind of a crazy idea in my mind that people are sort of proud of not post-processing an image. That would be like photographers, 60 years ago saying, I didn't use the darkroom at all.
Yeah, it's to me it sort of seems kind of similar to what graphic designers say, where um, somebody will say, "Oh, well, this image was done entirely in Photoshop," or somebody will say, "Well, this isn't a photo. This is something I did with the mesh tool in Illustrator,"
Right.
or something like that. And we're like, "Wow, that's awesome," but you could probably take a picture of that in like 5 seconds.
Yeah, there's definitely seems to be sort of people like to take pride in making something more complicated, which kind of goes against the ethos of keep it simple, stupid. So
Yeah.
for most of us, we're trying to make money per hour, so I don't really like to make things take longer.
hmm and so you said earlier that you said some photographers are reluctant to use Photoshop in their work, but how do you get like an old school photographer to trust you to take their photographs and do some post work on them?
It's one of those things. I do a lot of retouching for photographers, and a lot of guys that do commercial photography that are a little more old school, or they have so many clients that they don't want to touch a computer at all. They just think they should be able to sell it right out of camera. So one of the things I like to talk to them about is, you know, what do you wish you could have done the day during the shoot? Right? What was it that you got? Like, obviously your shot is great, and I would never challenge that. It's great out of camera, and it clearly doesn't need Photoshop. But if there was something you could have had that day, what would it have been? And a lot of time they'll say things like, well, I wish I'd had a little more backlight on the model's hair, or I wish I'd had a key light here on the front so that the mesh on that microphone that we took a shot of looked better. So those are the things I sort of give them the opportunity to say, well, I could do that for you. I could fix that. I can be the wizard, right? So a lot of the other ways that I can do it too is I'll see photographers who are shooting and they have an extensive rig for setting things up so that they can shoot it without going into Photoshop. And a lot of time I sort of say, hey, you could have just shot that on a nice colored chroma, and I could have knocked that out fast and dropped it in the background as a second shot. So when you start presenting either the wizard trick, like I'm the wizard or the genie, and I could grant any wish, I could fix that any way you want. Or you say, hey, how would you like me to have done that and only charged you an hour and a half to post-process it versus the 4 hours it took your assistant to set it up, right? And when you start talking money or wishes, most people listen.
Right. So after, let's say a photographer has sort of hired you to do their post work, do they still brag about how their work is?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of them get very stringent about like, well, you're not going to post my shot, right? And you're not going to tell anyone that you did this for me. And they get really, really secretive about, that they actually came to me like I'm some sort of back alley post processor, right? It's a shady deal in
Yeah.
pixels. I do get some of those guys that want to keep it a secret. And I think anybody nowadays, you can see that it doesn't matter how good you are, you can see that it's digital, period, whether it's a digital camera or it's being post-processed, but you can see that it's digital. So I don't think you actually have to tell anybody. Most people kind of have a sense of it. But hopefully the graphics and the shot are good enough that, that shouldn't be the first thing people think about, right? Like the last thing your client should say is, wow, that looks like some really nice Photoshop work. Or on the flip side for photographers, you don't want them to go, wow, that's a really great strobist setup. right? And
Hmm.
that's another sort of popular thing is all the strobist photographers. You really want people to go, that's a great image, or that communicates exactly what we wanted for this ad or for this campaign. So that's the big thing for me when I give an image to somebody. The last thing I want to hear is, wow, you did great Photoshop work. I want to hear that's a great image, you know. And I think if you can get them to say that because of your work, at that point, it's not hard to sell them on it anymore.
You know, as you and I and probably just about everybody who's watching this video right now know, the Photoshop is pretty much the tool of choice for anybody who wants to manipulate an image,
Yeah.
and that includes people who want to manipulate an image for nefarious purposes. I think if you're a Photoshop guy who sort of watches the news, occasionally there'll be like a Photoshop story. Or hey, this image was photoshopped. A few things that come to mind are, what was that image of Katie Couric, a long time ago, where
Right. Right.
they made her look like 20 years younger.
Yeah.
And then there was this, there was a big scandal not too long ago about Ralph Lauren, where they, deformed this poor model.
Yeah,
Um,
you know, I think that was actually kind of a genius marketing idea. A lot of people that I spoke to on forums, on Adobe forums, were sort of asking, do you guys think they over photoshopped those models on purpose? Because it was such a taboo, and media were calling out, like, this celebrity's been photoshopped to look this way, this celebrity's been photoshopped to look that way. Almost they played into the taboo to be able to generate some guerrilla marketing, right? So a lot of people were curious about that.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that is sort of one way that you can sort of, if you were really that desperate to get yourself out in the press, it's just totally deform, a beautiful model and make her look, um, you know, like a little monster or something, you know. But I mean, I guess and you even see like a few years ago or. Maybe it wasn't that long ago. It was at least a couple years ago where Iran had posted some picture of them, shooting off like 1,000 missiles. It was really
Yeah,
only. It was really, but the real picture showed that it was only like three missiles when, they had
yeah,
showed like four. And then there was, very recently was with the Osama bin Laden picture of, President Obama and the rest of his cabinet in the war room, looking on, and conservative religious newspaper decided to Photoshop all the women out of it.
yeah, yeah. Put them in, and they said, it was because of their beliefs that they weren't allowed to show women in a certain situation, and it kind of just goes to show, what the power of Photoshop has become, right? Like it's interesting to me now that it's a verb, right? You
Hmm.
Photoshop things. It's a doing, it's an action, and people talk about it all the time. I remember the first time I heard a journalist on TV say that was photoshopped, and I was extremely excited. I'm like, oh my god, people know what we do. And then I was like, oh my God, people know what we do. Like we can't hide this anymore. And now people are using it for those sort of purposes. There's a lot of opportunity for political manipulation.
Which I guess sort of brings me to my next question was that do you think Photoshop is an evil tool?
I think it can be. I think it can be an evil tool. I think that anytime you have something that's a powerful utility, people are going to use it in ways for personal gain. And there's a lot of people that don't have morals out there and scruples. And I think that we're going to only see that get worse as the tool gets easier to use, right? I mean, thanks to new features with CS5, it's even easier to cut people out of the background and fill spaces. It's so the thing is now you make it faster. Broadcast groups and media outlets that have to work fast can manipulate more quickly. And so sometimes I wonder about the speed that people work and if morals go out of the window because they're working so fast. But I think there's a lot of opportunity that we've already seen done where people are trying to say, oh, look, this politician was going into this hotel and the guy was never there. It's those sort of things are happening more commonly. And it's a shame because it's a powerful tool and people are sort of taking advantage of what it's supposed to be used for.
Which I guess too also brings me to another question: is do you think Photoshop is a tool for good, and do you think it is more of a tool for good or more of a tool for evil?
Uh, you know, I I'd like to think it's a tool for good. I mean, I make a lot of people happy with what I do for a living, right? I've taken models and they've gotten jobs out of it. Photo shoots that I've done or other people have done, and I've retouched the work, and they're ecstatic to see that their image can be picked up for a campaign. They've made careers and made money out of some of the work that I've contributed to. And there's a lot of people that are doing really, really good work in nonprofits, right, where they're getting to be able to take advantage of these tools that are so much faster and so much more convenient, and getting higher quality graphics from marketing and communication. So I think it is a really good tool. And I think we're seeing the benefits of that because people are learning it younger. I mean, I remember when I was a kid in school, to make a report for school literally meant cutting out pieces of paper and gluing them on the page, and then you went into the roll laminator and laminated that, and that's what you turned in, and it was sort of this weird craft fair project. I see kids now that are 14 years old that are cutting people out and building these intricate graphics for their book reports, and they're doing these amazing things. So I do think it's a tool for good because it's accelerating learning, it's accelerating messaging, and you're getting people to be more familiar with how to communicate visually, and that breaks down language barriers. So I do think it's an extremely powerful tool for good.
Yeah. On PSD Touch, as editor, I see people with wide ranges of talent. I see,
Sure.
I see people who use Photoshop for photography. I see like photo manipulators. I see digital painters. Web designers. You name it, and I see it. My next question is do you think that it's better to be a jack of all trades, or do you think it's better to be a specialist?
That's something that I've wrestled with my entire career. When I first started doing this, like most people, I think when they're starting out, you really just want to not end up working retail or some crappy job. So you kind of figure out what your skill set is, and then you try to spread that as thinly as possible across as many markets and as many opportunities as possible so that you can make money. That made me a really powerful user. I learned a lot because of all these different output medias, these different types of clients. But what I realized quickly was the specialists were getting to charge a lot of money, and they were sort of, carving a name for themselves. The problem around that was, how do you get anyone to trust you're a specialist until you've got a solid reputation, you've done a lot of work, and you've got a great portfolio? And so I think you almost have to start as a jack of all trades, and then you have the opportunity after that to turn into a specialist. I've been both, and I still do consider myself both. I've done everything from web, print. Obviously now I sort of work in a cavern that most designers never know about, which is presentation design. But I also am an Adobe certified expert. I got certified in Photoshop. I taught for 7 years, and really became a specialist. So the luxury of that now is I can pick and choose the type of work that I want and how I can be the specialist for that work. And that's really a blessing in my career because it's a freedom that you don't have normally in any kind of occupation.
Because I know that's a question that people ask me is, do you think that I should be a jack of all trades, or, do you think I need to be a specialist? But I also, frequently, just people ask me, Grant, well, what is the biggest piece of advice that you could give to me as a young designer? And for me, I most always tell them that, you should always put a value on your work, and that you
Absolutely.
should never do work for free. Whatever, it doesn't have to be $1 million, but you can always, but your work is worth something. Do you think that there's ever a time when you should work for exposure, or you should work for free?
I absolutely do, and I know that goes against the popular trend of the design community. But when I first moved to California, which is where I really tried to launch my career, the biggest, most important thing you have is some form of currency, right? Like you need to be able to generate currency, and it's an interesting topic that a lot of young designers, production artists, don't ever think about. And currency can be a lot of different things, right? It can be money, it can be cash, it can be trade. It can also be who you meet. So I did things in the early days where I agreed to do work for free or in trade, usually with reputable nonprofits or people that had high visibility as a nonprofit. I rarely did free work for the mom and pops. I think we all get caught into doing free work for our families and our cousins, and like we all design a web page for someone that you don't want to. But the thing that I was always conscious of was, what can this be valued as to me in a way that I can literally spend it? And I think that's the big question that people starting their careers have to ask is, how can I spend this free trade, right? So even work I did for nonprofits, they might have a campaign that was sponsored by a large Fortune 500 company. I did things for nonprofits that were having events sponsored by Pepsi or Hewlett Packard, and so on and so forth. And I always sort of asked, am I going to be able to showcase the work? Can I use it as a case study or in my portfolio? Is there any opportunity for me to be able to contact the people that are sponsoring the event so I can let them know, hey, I was the guy that did that work? And in a lot of cases, those 2 degrees of separation generated thousands upon thousands of dollars for me, and made a pretty healthy income. And sometimes it wasn't complicated work. Sometimes it was just, hey, we've got 20 images and we need them converted into transparent background TIFFs, right? It wasn't complicated stuff. I paid my rent a lot of times doing those kind of jobs. But I think you have to think about currency. So free, it's kind of an open-ended term. A lot of people think of it as cash. I think you've got to really evaluate, what do you get to spend by doing free work for other people.
Mm-hmm. I think that is sort of thinking of it as currency or or capital. I think is a really good way of thinking about sort of doing work like that. It's you're doing it for free, but then how can I spend that currency
Right.
or capital on
Yeah,
something else?
we've all had that the horrible situation of people saying, well, hey, why don't you do work for free for us, and I'll tell everyone that you did it, and one of those guys will hire you. And to me, that's kind of like, passing a snowball. If everyone keeps saying the next guy's going to hire you and they pass it along, eventually the snowball melts and you didn't get anything at the end.
Tell us some things that people don't learn in design school.
Oh man, there's so many different things. I think design schools around the world do a great job with getting to the core of design, right? And I typically see 2 types of people graduating from design schools. They're either the powerhouse sort of vocational tradesmen, like they know Photoshop, they know Illustrator, they know how to write their own JavaScripts for Photoshop, they know to do all these amazing, powerful things, and maybe in the design side they're okay, but they're going to mature into that. Or we see the flip side where someone comes out and they can, start citing David Carson projects and Sagmeister projects and, Saatchi and Saatchi, and they talk about everything as far as theory and principle. And, rarely do you see people that can do both. And that's a pretty good package if you can do both. But you still don't see design schools teaching people about business, entrepreneurial thinking, communication. How do you pitch to a client? How do you talk about your work? And design schools make you stand up in front of your class and talk in front of your classmates, and you build sort of a vernacular there. But I always tell people that's like being a musician talking to an audience of musicians. It's not really hard to tell them what you're doing. Most of them have already known just by looking at your work or listening to the song you're playing, right? Same thing here. If someone's going to come to me and tell me about a Photoshop piece they worked on, and inevitably what they do when they're talking through their portfolio is, how many layers did it take, and what filters did they use, and what brush techniques, and they go into sort of this in-depth recipe about their process. I can usually look at it, and in about 30 seconds I can tell you how I would have approached it, so it's usually not far off. But tell me why you did what you did. What was the design thinking behind it? What was your intent? Now that intent could be theory or it could be production. Like, hey, I knew this was going to go on a 20-foot jumbotron. I know that it's going to be used for this sort of campaign, which means it's going to be mixed between print and on web. So have a vernacular when you're pitching your ideas and you're pitching your projects that makes it clear to someone that doesn't do Photoshop, someone that doesn't do design. Because at the end of the day, it's not another designer that's usually going to pay you, right? It's normally going to be a project manager, a sales manager, a communications director, a Marcom team. These are the guys that don't speak the tech speak that we use. So I think communication in a business vernacular is really, really important. I also think, from the entrepreneurial side, figure out ways to make money. I see lots of people promoting and broadcasting in forums of their peers. these are not the people that are going to hire you. These are not the people that are going to pay your bills. You've got to figure out a way to market yourself. You've got to figure out a way to get your skills out there to people that are going to be wowed. I've done very, very simple projects that have made me, tens of thousands of dollars. Simple things, just touching up photos. But the people that hired me have no idea how easy or complicated that is. If I was going to try to go to an agency that does high-level digital imaging, they're going to know exactly how easy that is, and they're not going to, necessarily be wowed by me compared to the next guy. So I think you really got to start thinking in an entrepreneurial sense. I think you got to start thinking in a business sense. I think you got to start thinking about more than visual communication. It's got to be strategic communication. And you're not going to get that talking to classmates and peers. You're going to get that by pitching to clients and really thinking about how you present and how you speak.
One thing that I think back to when I was like, in school, just getting out of school, is I always think back to some of the mistakes that I made when I was back there. I was thinking of one time where I was interning for this company I was working for, and they had me do this graphic, and I did this graphic, whatever. It was an okay old web graphic. Put it up on the site, never thought about it again. Like 2 weeks later, I get a call from my boss, and she says, "Grant, take a look at this graphic." And I said, "Hey, it looks great, and she says, "What does it say?" And then I looked at it, and I just turned around and walked right out of the room. I didn't say anything. Walked right out of the room, went right back to my computer and fixed it. And it was
Right.
it was a simple little spelling error. And that was a mistake that I made. But, easily could have been fixed had somebody else looked at it, or had I really paid attention, or what
Right.
I was doing. And so I know recently you wrote an article on our site, actually. May or may not will have been published by the time people see this interview. But I was wondering if you could sort of tell our audience, what are some tips that you could give to help them reduce the number of mistakes that they make when they design?
Yeah, sure. I think I know the mistakes because I've made pretty much all of them. And there's a lot of different ways to make simple mistakes that eat up time. The first one, and I think this is probably the most important one, so I'll just start there, is you can't work in a silo. It doesn't matter if you're a freelancer. It doesn't matter if you're working at an agency. It doesn't matter if you're an in-house guy. Do not be so proud that you work in a silo where you try to own your project. You kind of work with it, with your arm wrapped around, and you're sort of drawing in here. And every once in a while you pop your head up and look around and, kind of try to work that way. Because what happens is you're not getting a second set of eyes. You're not getting a fresh perspective. And there's a couple of things that happen there. Not only will a fresh set of eyes catch the simplest little mistakes, but the voice that these other people have is a solid perspective that you probably didn't consider. And the day that I started to mature and took my pride out of it and started asking for the opinion of others and really sought it out aggressively, I noticed my portfolio got stronger. It got more diverse. It got richer. And I started getting more rich clients in the sense of the type of messaging that they want. It was no longer, can you cut this dog out and put it in front of a brick wall? I was starting to get actual, political campaigns that moved me, and some of my own, personal beliefs. So I think that's the first thing is, don't make the little spelling mistake. Don't make the grammatical error. I have a lot of friends now that were communication majors. I almost always send them a project and say, hey, does anybody have a second to read the copy on this? If you have friends like that, buy them a beer. It's a pretty cheap way to get an editor to overlook your stuff. But that's a big one. Second set of eyes. Another one is people try to work too fast. And that sort of is counterintuitive to what we were talking about business sense, right? Try to work faster. That way you can take on more clients, which means you can make more money. But there is a point on a curve where you start realizing, hey, I'm working so fast that my mistake rate is going up, right? And so you've got to find where that threshold is and where that balance is for you. And that's going to shift over time. I can do a lot more work now with way less mistakes than I could 8 years ago. So I think you have to really realize, at what point am I in control of my quality when I'm starting to show work to friends and peers and strangers even? I've pulled out my iPhone and shown things to people and said, hey, what does that say to you? Because I want to know if I'm hitting the nail on the head with my concept. And when I start hearing very little feedback in the way of errors, and I start hearing more feedback in the way of excitement, or oh, that's really cool, or they don't immediately go, why is there 3 or 4 periods for and so on. The little things start disappearing, and I know I can maybe push it a little faster and see if those mistakes keep happening. Push it a little faster, and then find where that threshold is. That's really, really important. People either try to go really fast, or they're way overcautious and they try to go way too slow. And you can't make any money going too slow. That's definitely a concern. So I like to make the comparison to race car drivers. They know how to go really fast in the straightaways, but they're even smarter about knowing exactly how fast they can go in the corners. And that's where the intelligence comes in.
Awesome, Matt. I really like that comparison, actually. One thing you mentioned earlier, I wanted to bring it up then, but sort of I just decided to let you talk about other things. But I guess is you mentioned presentation design, and so I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about what presentation design is.
Yeah, I think like most people, when I started out as a designer, I started in print. I quickly moved into being a web guy, and I worked as a web designer for a long time. Then I went into being an animation guy. I was, working in an animation house that dealt with Flash, and this is going back to Flash 2, a long time ago. And recently, about a little over 3 years ago, I got a job with Duarte Design out in California. And I had seen some of their work and some of the things they were doing, and I thought this was really interesting. After working in design for over 10 years, at that point, actually 12. I realized that I needed something fresh that I wasn't seeing everybody do. And I also was seeing a lot of designers either having to take lower pay, or the market was just falling out. And so, I think that's an important opportunity to realize I need to reinvent myself and find a market where it's not saturated with kids coming out of school. And presentation design was definitely that. Here was an opportunity to do work with all of the advantages of print and web and none of the challenges. I get to do only on-screen media, just like web, so I don't have the resolution battles of a print designer, but I don't have to code anything. It also doesn't involve heavy animation like After Effects or Flash, or Premiere or Final Cut Pro, so I don't have the render times that you normally deal with. So from a technical standpoint, it's a beautiful position, because the work can be really, really fast, high quality, with very few of the technical challenges. As far as what it is, our focus at Duarte is having people bring their content to us, and we turn it into a story. We try to take what would normally be a really boring sales pitch or a really boring piece of technical data, and we try to turn that into a story that's compelling to an audience, kind of make the audience king, and make sure that the message resonates with them and hits home. So that's a big part of what we do at Duarte, and we deal with some of the largest corporations from around the world, and it's really, really exciting. We don't just do a design, it goes in a magazine and goes out, right? Like, we design slides that either end up in, and I know this is a dirty word, so everyone's going to just freak out when they see this video. We design graphics for PowerPoint. I'll give a second. I'll give a second for the booze. And we also use Keynote on the Apple side of things. But we actually get to work with the presenters. We actually get to meet the people that are going to use our graphics. We get to see them stand on a stage and present in front of thousands of people. And that's really, really cool. We've built presentations where when they finally presented at CES, is one event that a lot of our clients are at, we'll see people tweeting going, "Did you see that slide? That was wicked. That was cool. It was awesome." And that's way cool, man. We sat there during CES this year and just watched tags on Twitter and people commenting about our presentations and people commenting on our graphics. I never experienced that before as a web designer. You didn't see people virally communicating or socially communicating about your media, about your work, right? When I did some packaging design, it was exciting to go into a store and see your package, but that was sort of a one-time thing. Now when we design presentations, it's can be that story side of things, or it can also be maybe you design a campaign template, right? And so that's really cool too, because you start having to think strategically about infographics and positioning and grids and systems and usability. And there's a little bit of UI design in that respect, like how do people put their content into this canvas that you've formed and forged. and still make it stay on brand, still make it look visually rich, still make it, communicate the character of that company, and it can be used by hundreds of reps around the world. So it's a really cool gig, man. I would actually push a lot of people to learn more about presentation design, and I can tell you the assumptions that you have about the media as far as PowerPoint or Keynote are all wrong. I thought it was going to be a horrible thing, and there are guys at our agency who build things in PowerPoint that other multimedia guys I've shown them to said, well, that had to have been built in C4D and then brought into After Effects, and it must have been rendered out through Final Cut Pro. And I go, no, that was all just done with PNGs from Photoshop directly into PowerPoint, and then it can be played and timed and controlled dynamically from the stage.
Now, because we have, on some of our marketplaces, we have some really popular themes for
Yeah, I've seen those.
for PowerPoint, where people can just
Yeah.
download them and use them in their presentations. But I think that's kind of cool because, well, how would you suggest that somebody get into the presentation design field? I know it's sort of a niche, and I know that there are probably a lot of people who sort of like, well, I don't really like web design, but print is dead, or
Right.
there's not a lot of opportunity to do print. But how do I get into this sort of niche field?
Well, earlier I said an important thing for your success is to make sure that the people you're showing your work to aren't your peers. Think about for a second how many people are designers in the world and how many people have Adobe products, right? And then think about how many people in the world have Windows and how many people have Office and PowerPoint. You're talking about millions upon millions upon millions of people, and a good percentage of them are business related. So, in the old days, people that built presentations were admin assistants, and managers are starting to learn like, okay, the admin assistant I got from the temp agency was hired to know Excel and filing and emails, Outlook, whatever. They're not designers. And so I would stress there are sites out there that have tutorials. Our blog at duarte.com actually has, some things that we put up there from time to time. But lynda.com also has some tips for PowerPoint. I would love to see the Envato group, similar to PSD, end up with a presentation toots kind of site. I think that would be really cool. But there's a lot of people out there that have tutorials for free. There's a lot on YouTube. There's a lot on Vimeo, and I would say learn them. There are very specific nuances to that application that probably less than 10% of users know out of all those millions. Which means if you're the specialist who've come from that background as a jack of all trades, you've got a pretty great opportunity to make a lot of money using your skills in a way that you can enjoy. And I bring a lot of value to the teams that I've worked with because of my background experience is so diverse. So I think that's going to be the same for a lot of the people out there in this community. Making graphics for business executives who are used to paying agencies $175 an hour probably aren't going to, feel too bad about paying an individual 80 or $90 an hour to do high-level graphics and then build presentations for them.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you coming, talking with us, spending your time. I know it's kind of late where you are, but I just wanted to give you one final opportunity. Do you have any final words for our viewers?
I would say, the community is great, and thanks for the opportunity of getting on and getting to talk to everybody. The thing that I like most about the Photoshop community is how people push the envelope. And what I really like seeing, and I'm sort of the older horse in the pen now. I like seeing guys pushing the technological envelope with Photoshop, but even more so the styles that you can produce with the tool. There's a lot of guys who sort of create one look. Right now we seem to be in this flux of everybody doing graphics to look like the 80s all over again, is trying to make retro graphics, and that's really hip. 4 years ago, everyone was downloading grunge brushes and doing that. I've seen them all. I would say don't follow, lead. If you see, 40 guys doing the same thing as far as an approach to a tutorial or an approach to your portfolio, learn it and then learn how to stand on the shoulders of giants and go above and beyond it. That's sort of my call to the next guys coming up, because you're going to teach me something, and that's what I need to stay fresh as well.
Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll get talking again soon.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Grant, and thanks to everybody out there in the community.